A quick message before we start the episode. Since we recorded these episodes, Marco Jansen left Braskem, so we cannot say that these are the views of Braskem any longer. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hi, my name is Barbara Mendes-Jorge, and I am a sustainability communications expert based in Brussels, Belgium. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Let's Talk Sustainable Business, a series brought to you by the Conference Board. Today is the first of a two-part episode with Marco Jansen, Business Director of Biopolymers in Europe, the Middle East and Africa, as well as Advocacy and Sustainability Director of Europe and Asia at Braskem. Based in the Netherlands, Marco has worked in the plastics space for over 20 years, and he is also a board member for the trade association Plastics Europe. This episode's theme is bio-based materials and their role in creating a more sustainable future. For the next two episodes, I'll be talking to Marco about bio-based plastics and his company Braskem's I'm Green bio-based plastic, which is made from sugarcane sourced from Brazil. Traditionally a petrochemical company, in 2010 Braskem established its first renewable ethylene plant and conducted a life cycle analysis for biopolymers. After receiving certifications to start producing bio-based plastics, in 2018 Braskem launched a new resin made from sugarcane-based ethanol, bio-based EVA. EVA stands for ethylene vinyl acetate, and that is a polymer that can be used to make products which are rubber-like in their softness and flexibility. Braskem's bio-based polyethylene, or BioPE, was first produced in October 2010, and it is suitable for a wide range of applications such as food and beverages, cleaning products and toys, and it has a bio-based content of between 80 and 100%. It can be recycled in traditional plastic waste streams. In 2021, Braskem invested $87 million to increase biopolymer production by 30%, which it successfully did by 2023. And it has been evaluating potential expansion in the USA and Thailand as part of the company's goal to produce 1 million metric tons of biopolymers by 2030. So welcome, Marco. I'm looking forward to chatting about Braskem's I'm Green and the role of plastics in sustainability.
Thank you, Barbara, for having me.
Thank you for coming. So could I start by asking you to expand on what your role is at Braskem and what you particularly work on relating to biopolymers?
Sure. As my very long title already gives away a little bit, it's quite a bit. But I would say my main responsibility is related to the biopolymers business side. So I'm responsible for all the business activities in Europe, Middle East, and Africa related to our biopolymers. And in the case of biopolymers, it's polyethylene made from sugarcane-based ethanol that's produced in Brazil. Next to that, I'm responsible for our sustainability activities in the region, Europe and Asia, that is, as well as external affairs and advocacy. And then to top that, I'm also responsible for all of our investment activities in the region. So looking for opportunities for future investments related to biopolymers to meet that 1 million ton goal that you referred to earlier.
So you're a busy man, in short, lots to do.
Well, not alone, luckily.
Thankfully. We'll definitely come back to what you're doing on sustainability activities, but I was just wondering, have you always worked on biopolymers at Braskem, or were you also involved in other areas of the business?
Most of the time I've been involved in biopolymers. So I joined Braskem in 2010,
Mm-hmm.
and actually probably one and a half years later I started to get involved in the sales of biopolymers in Europe and later also in the US. In the meantime, I think it was 2019 when I also started our circular economy department for Europe and Asia. Um, so that then included the activities related to recycling.
Mm-hmm.
But since I think it's now 2 years ago, we split the recycling and biopolymers activities again because we have these ambitious goals on both. And now I'm focusing almost exclusively, at least the business side, on biopolymers.
Okay, thank you. We've both talked about what one of your main products is, and we've referred to it being made from sugarcane, or more specifically, sugarcane-based ethanol. So I was wondering if you could explain the production process and I guess the inspiration behind the product in a bit more detail.
Yes, I don't know if you're aware, but in Brazil, during the oil crisis, I think it was in the 80s, Brazil had to look at alternatives to oil. And as they produced a lot of bioethanol already, they looked at that as a fuel replacement. So they significantly increased the activities related to bioethanol to use as a fuel replacement. And that's been going on for many years now. And then some years ago, I think it was 2007, somebody had the bright idea to think about producing polyethylene from that same bioethanol that's being used as a fuel replacement currently. So the way it's being produced right now is that sugarcane is harvested and then crushed, and then in most cases the majority of the juice goes into sugar, but
Mhm.
then there's some leftover juice after the first or second crush that's then diluted with water that's not really usable for sugar production, at least not efficiently. That's then being used to produce bioethanol. And as I mentioned, most of it is being used for fuel replacement, but we're now using a small part of that for producing plastics.
Interesting. So it's you're using basically a byproduct of the sugar production process to produce it.
I would love to say yes to that, but actually we call it a co-product
Okay.
because it's intentionally produced. So you can't really
Right.
say it's a byproduct.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's yeah, they go hand in hand most of the time. The majority of the modern plants in Brazil, they produce first sugar and then bioethanol.
Hmm. Thank you for providing the context because I actually didn't know that it was because of the oil crisis in the 80s that Brazil focused on this. I remember learning at school in the 90s, that Brazil made bioethanol. I remember drawing cars powered by sugar in my probably my science lessons, but I didn't know that was the reason why they made that shift. So thank you. So obviously you're making a product from sugarcane, and I'm sure you get a lot of questions relating to sustainability. And on your website, it says the basis of our sustainability claims stems from our insistence to only source ethanol from sugarcane that is grown far away from high diversity biomass, such as the Amazon rainforest, by farms with fair working conditions and protections for biodiversity in place. So, how does Braskem work to ensure that
Yeah.
sugarcane is responsibly sourced?
This is probably the most common question next to pricing that we
Of
get.
course.
And uh, we have a responsible sourcing program that we developed together with Proforest initially, and then we tried to improve it with Imaflora, which is a local NGO in Brazil, last year. And we focus on a number of aspects related to sustainability practices, biodiversity, um, looking at human rights, working conditions, making sure that people are paid well, that sugarcane is no longer burned. So we're trying to look at all the, let's say, sustainability aspects that are relevant to the sourcing of the sugarcane. And when we say it's far away from the rainforest, it's not only because it's the right thing to do, but also it doesn't make sense to grow sugarcane over there because you need a certain share of water, but also sunlight. And the region, which is more the southeastern part of Brazil, where it's most commonly produced, which is the part around Sao Paulo State, Minas Gerais, etc. This is where you have this right balance of rainfall and sunshine, and you need that balance because you could grow sugarcane in the Amazon area, but because of the high rainfall and the relatively low sunshine, you would have a very high water content and a very low sugar content. So that's also one of the reasons why it's produced in that specific region. And then expansion of the sugarcane industry is mainly on degraded pasture land. As you know, Brazil is the largest or one of the largest producer of beef, and there's a lot of land that's being abandoned because there's no nutrition anymore for the cattle. And as sugarcane grows on relatively poor soil, this is very suitable for the expansion of sugarcane.
So you're taking over areas that are abandoned that were for, I'm guessing, soy, for beef and other crops.
It's actually where the cattle used to walk,
Ah, with the
right?
question
So
to
it's
graze.
actually the
Okay,
grazing area. Yeah.
okay, okay. Interesting. And I mean, yeah, you said, alongside pricing, these are some of the main questions that you get. Again, on your website, you say there are always questions raised on how much this alternative solution to fossil plastic can grow without competing with the food supply chain. How do you at least try and balance that dilemma within the company?
Honestly, it's not a huge dilemma, if I'm really honest, because the land that's being used is really, I would say, almost negligible. We produce 260,000 tons of biopolymers now, for which we use less than 0.03% of the arable land. So
Hmm.
even if we would convert all of our plastics to bioplastics, it would still be less than 0.2% of the arable land. So it's a very, let's say, small part of the arable land. And if you see that still 30% of the land in Brazil is still available for future expansion of agriculture, there's a lot of land available. And of course, we're very conscious about the fact that we need to be sure that it's not competing or as little competing with food and feed as possible. I think, let's say, the impact is relatively small.
Yeah, and I guess you'll have to keep this in mind if indeed you do expand to the US and Thailand, which is a totally different country and landscape.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, obviously, you claim that your bio-based PE reduces your customers' carbon footprint quite substantially, especially when compared to plastics made from 100% fossil fuels. So, I was wondering if you could share some numbers with our clients on the average carbon emissions reduction a customer could have, maybe in a particular sector or for a particular application.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you look at traditional polyethylene, you emit around 2.5 kilos to 3 kilos of CO2 per kilo produced. In the case of our bio-based material, you actually absorb around 2 kilos, a little bit more than 2 kilos of CO2. And that's because the plant actually captures and sequesters the CO2 during the growth process. So it takes CO2 out of the atmosphere. So in balance, you would save, let's say, safely 4 kilos for every kilo of plastics that you would replace with bioplastics.
Which is quite something.
Yes, it's not insignificant for sure.
It's
Yeah.
not insignificant. Uh, and obviously, that's a huge carbon saving benefit. And I was wondering, are there any other kind of sustainability related benefits to switching to bio-based PE? Obviously, we've kind of touched on, I guess, the more social sides of, you're using land that was abandoned and now can be put to use again. But are there any other sustainability benefits that you'd like to share?
Of course, I mean, you're decoupling from fossil finite resources, right? Which is a very important one because it's a totally renewable crop. And I think there's some people who say that in general, I'm not just talking about our material, but when you move to natural resources, you're less dependent on the few countries that can produce or can extract oil, right?
Hmm.
So you would have the possibility to significantly expand the let's say the countries that could benefit from bio-based plastics, where now is very few companies that benefit from the extraction of oil. So geopolitically, it would bring also quite some potential benefits.
A very interesting point, and also kind of linking back to the social element of sustainability as much as the environmental. Great. Um, so continuing on kind of your sustainability focus, I read that Braskem joined the Renewable Carbon Initiative to support its journey towards a net zero circular economy by 2050. So I was wondering if you could explain to our listeners who might not know what the Renewable Carbon Initiative is and what is your 2050 vision in a little bit more detail.
The Renewable Carbon Initiative is a really interesting collaboration in the whole value chain. So where you have a lot of industry associations that are specifically focusing on a specific part of the value chain. Um, the Renewable Carbon Initiative is trying to look at the whole value chain, um, from, let's say, the producer of the raw material until the final brand owner in the value chain. And you see also in their membership that there's a wide variety of companies with different activities. And their focus is trying to replace, um, let's say, fossil carbon with renewable one. And with renewable, they include bio-based, but also recycling. So they see both recycling as bio-based and also carbon capture and utilization as renewable carbon. So that's the focus of that specific, um, let's say, group of people, group of companies. And like many other companies, we have the ambition that by 2050 to be carbon neutral. And yeah, we're working hard doing that with many different initiatives. and our biopolymers is one way to, let's say, decarbonize our scope 3 emissions, and and also helping to reduce the scope 3 emissions of our clients.
And I guess also the bigger a part of the business you become, obviously, the more likely it is that carbon emissions of the business and the business's value chain will also reduce.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you're trying to compensate for your scope 3 emissions, as are many companies, including some that I'm working with at the moment. Um, and one of the ways that you're doing that is through offsets, and you're focused on CO2 removal and product diversification. So, you know, circular economy, net zero are starting to become, unfortunately, slightly loaded terms as they are being misused very often in kind of the communications by certain companies or to talk about products. So, could I ask you, like, what do you feel the role should be that offsets play on the road to net zero by 2050, and any of the other measures you're taking to reduce those scope 3 emissions and other carbon emissions?
I think the first goal is to reduce the energy consumption and the emissions, right? So I think that's the initial goal that you have, and that's, I would say, almost the low-hanging fruit, right? That every company wants to do, because at the same time, by reducing your energy consumption, you're saving costs. So that's a no-brainer for many companies. And then what we're trying to do on top is we're looking at how we can make our energy use more sustainable by using more solar energy, by using more wind energy. Our plants in Europe have been fully converted to electricity from renewable resources. Significant part of our electricity consumed in Brazil is from renewable resources. As you may know, Brazil has a big part of the energy coming from renewable resources, whether that's hydro, sun, wind, or actually from the sugarcane industry, from the bagasse that's being converted into energy. So I think that's those are the main activities, and then on top of that, you can include the more sustainable feedstocks into your crackers, like bionafta, for instance, which will also help to reduce your carbon footprint, because part of the naphtha is being used to create energy again in your plants. So there's a wide variety of solutions that we are looking at. And to be honest, I'm pretty sure that some of the solutions that we need don't exist yet, right? So they are still under development. Um, and the offsetting, I think that there's a value in offsetting, but only as an intermediate solution. I think this is not the final game plan. I think for many companies, I think when there's an imbalance in the uh, let's say the production, if you like, of low carbon energy versus the need for low carbon energy, I think these offsets will be there for some time. But I think it's more of an intermediate solution than that will be the final solution.
And I imagine that because if you're focused on scope 3 as well, you're probably, I'm asking, are you starting a dialogue with your suppliers? Because obviously that's where a lot of scope 3 emissions come from, on scope 3 emissions, and going through all that process of reporting and kind of calculating a fuller carbon footprint. What stage are
Yeah,
you on?
I mean, our carbon neutrality goals and commitment is scope 1 and 2 for the time being, which doesn't mean that we don't focus on scope 3. So we look at both upstream and downstream scope 3 emissions to see how we can reduce those. So we're talking both to our feedstock suppliers, but also, for instance, the shipping companies that we work with, to look at how we can have the most efficient ways of shipping. So I think we're looking on both spectrums of the scope 3 emissions.
I mean, you mentioned that with the Renewable Carbon Initiative that what's good about it is that it brings all these people from the different sides of the value chain. So I guess that will be very important with you having those kinds of partnerships and collaborations in the future.
Absolutely. I think you need each other in this transition. And I mean, I've been in this industry for 14 years now. I think I've been to adjacent industries for much longer. And I've never seen such a speed of change as we've seen over the last 5 years or so. If you see, for instance, the roadmap that Plastics Europe has just been publishing, it's a huge transformation that the industry is going through in a speed that I think has never been seen before. And the only way to do that is to work together with all of the partners in the value chain.
And I think that's a perfect way to finish part one. So thank you to Marco for joining us today. This is the first of a two-part episode, so join us next time for part two. And thank you to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to this podcast series and explore the entire catalogue of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. See you next time.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.